They didn't whisper it. They didn't soften it. They said it plainly, like a diagnosis that required no treatment. She's just waiting to die now. Those words weren't spoken to my face. They were said in the hallway of a hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, behind a thin curtain that did nothing to stop sound or shame. I was 64 years old, lying in a stiff bed with N4 in my arm, staring at a ceiling tile shaped like a cracked continent, when I heard my own life reduced to a waiting room. My name is Margaret Maggie Collins, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The world had already buried me, while I was still breathing. I'd lived my entire life quietly. I raised 2 children, worked 35 years as a public school librarian, paid my taxes, brought casseroles to grieving neighbors, and waved politely at people who never learned my name. I didn't demand much. I didn't expect applause. I thought that was enough. But once my husband passed and my knees gave out, once my hair turned white and my calendar emptied, I stopped being seen as a person and became a problem to manage. My daughter, Karen, stood at the foot of my bed that day, arms crossed tightly like she was holding herself together. My son, David, paced near the window, checking his phone more than he checked on me. The doctor spoke gently, but the message was sharp. My body was slowing down, my independence was fading, and we should start thinking realistically. Realistically. That word followed me home. After the hospital stay, they insisted I move in with Karen temporarily. My little brick house, where I'd lived for 27 years, was suddenly too much. The stairs were dangerous. The neighborhood wasn't ideal. The silence made them uncomfortable. So I packed my life into boxes labeled by someone else. Karen's house was clean, modern, and painfully loud in its quiet judgment. Everything had a place, except me. I slept in a guest room that smelled like unopened luggage. I was told when dinner was. I was reminded to take my pills. I was thanked for helping when I folded laundry I hadn't dirted. And slowly, without a meeting or a vote, my opinions stopped mattering. You don't need to worry about that anymore, Mom. Just rest. You've earned it. Earned what? Disappearing? The worst part wasn't the loss of control. It was the way people spoke around me, like I wasn't fully present. Conversations about my future happened without me. Decisions were made in soft voices followed by sympathetic looks in my direction. One afternoon, I overheard Karen on the phone in the kitchen. She doesn't really do much anymore, she said. I mean, she's basically just waiting. Waiting. That word landed heavier than any diagnosis. Waiting to die. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it hum like a clock counting down someone else's timeline for me. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from rage I didn't know I still had. I wasn't done. I wasn't finished being useful, or curious, or alive. And in that darkness, with my children asleep down the hall and my life neatly minimized into a single bedroom, I made a decision so quiet no one noticed it at first. If they thought I was waiting to die, then they were about to be very, very wrong. Because the next chapter of my life didn't begin with permission. It began with defiance. And what happened next shocked everyone who thought my story was already over. The morning it started, nothing dramatic happened.
No announcement. No confrontation.
No swelling music like in the movies. I simply woke up before everyone else. The house was still dark, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're trespassing in your own life. I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet flat on the floor, heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. My knees protested as usual, but this time, I didn't apologize to them. I waited, breathed, then stood anyway. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. 64.
Pale.
Tired. Hair pinned back in a way that said don't cause trouble. I realized I had been dressing for invisibility. That morning, I didn't. I pulled on my old denim jacket, the one my husband used to tease me about. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust and memories. I slipped my feet into walking shoes Karen had bought me just in case, still clean, still untouched. I didn't leave a note. I told myself I was just going for air. Outside, the Ohio morning was sharp and alive. cold enough to wake my bones. The sky was streaked pink and gray, like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be yet. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, feeling ridiculous for how nervous I was. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew where I wasn't. I walked. At first, it was just to the end of the block. Then past it. Each step felt rebellious, like I was crossing an invisible boundary drawn by everyone else. My knees burned. My breath came short. A sensible voice in my head whispered that I should turn back. I ignored it. I ended up at a small park I hadn't noticed before. Nothing special. A few benches. A tired swing set. A plaque honoring someone no one remembered. I sat down hard, chest heaving, heart racing. And then something unexpected happened. I felt proud. Not because it was impressive, but because it was mine. A man walking his dog nodded at me. Just a simple nod. Not pity. Not concern. Recognition. It startled me how much that mattered. I sat there for almost an hour, watching joggers pass, listening to the wind in the trees. For the first time in years, no one was watching me to make sure I was okay. No one was timing my pills or adjusting my schedule. I existed without supervision. When I finally walked back, my legs trembled like I'd climbed a mountain. Karen was in the kitchen when I came in, her face tightening the moment she saw me. "Where were you?" she asked. The question wasn't curious. It was alarmed. "I went for a walk," I said. Her eyes dropped to my shoes, then back to my face. "Alone?" I nodded. She exhaled sharply. "Mom, you can't just do that. What if something happened?" I wanted to say 100 things. That something had happened to my spirit. That staying still was killing me faster than walking ever could. But instead, I said something small and dangerous. I was fine. That night, I slept better than I had in months. And the next morning, I did it again. Then again. Each day, I went a little farther. Down different streets. To different parks. Once, to a diner where the waitress called me hon and didn't rush me. I ordered pancakes and ate every bite, ignoring the voice that said I shouldn't. Something inside me was waking up. Not loudly. Not all at once. But insistently. Karen started hovering more. David called more often, his voice tight, with concern disguised as care. They talked about installing safety apps. About monitoring. About how this was a phase. They didn't know that with every step I took, I was building something they couldn't see yet. Confidence. And soon, I wasn't just walking anymore. I was planning. And the next thing I decided to do, something I hadn't told anyone, would turn their quiet worry into absolute disbelief. Because I wasn't just stepping outside. I was stepping back into life. The idea came to me in the most ordinary place imaginable. I was sitting at that same diner, stirring cold coffee I'd forgotten to drink, watching people come and go like they had somewhere to be. A bulletin board near the restrooms caught my eye, layers of yellowed flyers, curling at the corners. Guitar lessons. Lost cat. Church rummage sale. And then I saw it. Community college. Adult continuing education. Classes start Monday. I stared at that paper like it had personally challenged me. I hadn't taken a class since the late 1970s. Back then, learning had felt like a doorway to a future. Somewhere along the way, people decided learning was wasted on someone like me. I was supposed to rest, be managed, stay safe. I tore off one of the tabs before I could talk myself out of it. That afternoon, instead of going straight home, I took a bus across town. My heart pounded the entire ride, not from fear of falling, but from the thrill of doing something without asking permission. The campus wasn't glamorous. Low buildings, cracked sidewalks, but it buzzed with life. Students of all ages moved with purpose, backpacks slung over shoulders, coffee cups in hand. No one looked at me twice. At the registration desk, the woman smiled and slid a clipboard toward me. "What are you interested in?" I hesitated. For years, my interests had been dismissed as impractical or exhausting. Then I heard myself say it. Writing. The word surprised both of us. I signed up for a memoir writing class that met twice a week in the evenings. Paid the fee with money I'd quietly saved. took the receipt and folded it into my pocket like a secret. I didn't tell my children. I told them I was going for walks, doctor appointments, library visits. All technically true, just incomplete. For the first time, I understood why teenagers lie. Not out of rebellion, out of survival. That first night in class, I almost didn't walk in. I stood outside the room listening to laughter, convinced I'd be the oldest, slowest, most out-of-place person there. When I finally stepped inside, my hands shook so badly I had to grip the chair. There were people older than me, younger than me, broken and brilliant in different ways. The instructor asked us to write for 10 minutes about a moment that changed our lives. I stared at the blank page. Then my pen started moving. Words poured out about the hospital hallway, the whispered sentence, the feeling of being erased while still alive. I wrote until my wrist ached. When time was up, the room was silent. The instructor asked if anyone wanted to share. I didn't raise my hand.
My voice did.
As I read, my chest tightened. But something else happened too. People listened. Not politely. Not out of obligation. They leaned forward. One woman wiped her eyes. A man nodded slowly, like he understood something about himself. After class, someone touched my arm gently. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I feel like that too." I walked home floating. The weeks that followed felt like living a double life. At home, I was still fragile Maggie, the one who needed reminders and supervision. Outside, I was a student, a writer, a woman with opinions and deadlines.
My posture changed.
My voice got steadier. I started wearing lipstick again, not for anyone else, but because it made me feel awake. Karen noticed. "You seem different," she said one evening, watching me from across the kitchen. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I replied. She frowned. Concern hardened into suspicion. David suggested a checkup. Karen offered to drive me everywhere, just in case. They were tightening the leash without realizing I'd already slipped it. The breaking point came when Karen found my notebook. She hadn't meant to snoop, she said. It was lying open on the bed. Pages filled with my handwriting, raw, honest, alive. Her face was pale when she confronted me. "You're doing too much," she said. "This isn't safe. You're getting ideas." Ideas. Like they were dangerous. That night, after another argument about what I could and couldn't handle, I sat alone and realized something heartbreaking. They loved me, but they loved a smaller version of me, and I had outgrown her. The decision I made next wasn't impulsive.
It was terrifying.
It was necessary, because the life I had reclaimed in secret was about to demand space. And when I finally told them what I was going to do, their reaction would change everything. I didn't announce it dramatically.
There was no speech. No ultimatum.
I waited until a Sunday afternoon when the house was unusually quiet. Karen was folding laundry at the dining table. David had come by to check in, which meant they were both there, together, united, prepared. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around a mug of tea.
"I'm moving out," I said.
The words hung in the air like something breakable. Karen laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Mom, don't be ridiculous." David frowned. "Where would you even go?" "I've already found a place," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "A small apartment. 1 bedroom. Elevator building. 10 minutes from the bus line." Silence. Karen's face shifted from confusion to panic. "This is a joke, right? You can't live alone. What if you fall? What if something happens at night?" I took a breath. Something is already happening.
"I'm disappearing."
They started talking at the same time. Safety.
Doctors.
Responsibility.
Love.
All the familiar words that wrapped control and concern. I listened. I really did. Then I said the hardest thing I'd ever said to my children. I would rather risk falling than spend my life being carried. Karen's eyes filled with tears. David looked away, jaw tight. "You think we're trying to hurt you?" he asked. "No," I said softly. "I think you're trying to protect a version of me that no longer exists." I told them about the class, the writing, The way I felt when people didn't look at me like I was fragile glass. I told them I wasn't asking for permission, only honesty. Karen cried. David argued. Both begged. I didn't change my mind. 2 weeks later, I packed again, this time on my own terms. The apartment wasn't much.
Beige walls.
A view of a parking lot. But it was mine. The first night, I sat on the floor eating takeout Chinese food straight from a container, laughing out loud at nothing. I slept like a stone. The days that followed were terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Every sound at night felt louder. Every ache made me pause. But each morning, I woke up knowing my choices belonged to me again. I kept writing. My instructor encouraged me to submit a piece to a local reading event. I almost said no. Old habits die hard. But then I remembered that hospital hallway and said yes. The night of the reading, the room was full. Folding chairs, coffee breath, nervous energy. When my name was called, my legs shook as I walked to the podium. I read the piece about being written off, about how dangerous it is to tell someone their life is already over. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was sincere. Afterward, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. You said exactly what I'm afraid of, she whispered. Thank you for surviving out loud. That phrase stayed with me. Surviving out loud. A week later, my children came to my apartment together. Karen hugged me longer than usual. David noticed the stack of notebooks on my table. You look happy, he admitted. I am, I said. What they didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that something bigger was unfolding. My instructor had submitted my piece to a regional anthology. I hadn't expected anything to come of it. Then the email arrived. Accepted. That small yes would set off a chain reaction none of us could have predicted. Because the woman they thought was just waiting to die was about to be seen, publicly, undeniably, as someone who still had something to say. And when that happened, everyone who underestimated me would be forced to listen. The email sat unread for almost an hour. Not because I hadn't seen it, but because I was afraid of what it might change. I'd already been accepted into the anthology, and that alone felt unreal. My words, my life, bound into pages that strangers would hold. That was more than I ever expected at this stage. Enough, even. But this email was different. It wasn't from my instructor. It was from a producer at a regional public radio station in Ohio. Someone had read my piece. Someone thought my story mattered beyond a classroom. They wanted me to come in and talk about aging, invisibility, and what it means to reclaim your life after 60. I read the message 3 times, my hands shaking. Then I laughed. Out loud. Alone in my apartment. A year earlier, people were whispering that I was just waiting to die. Now someone was asking me to speak. The interview was live. I almost canceled. Fear is sneaky. It disguises itself as humility, as practicality, as be realistic. But I recognize that voice now. It was the same one that tried to keep me small. So I showed up. The studio smelled like coffee and electronics. The host greeted me warmly, not like a patient or a problem, but like a guest. When the red light turned on, my throat tightened. Then I told the truth. About the hospital hallway. About being managed instead of asked. About how dangerous it is when society decides older women are done contributing. I talked about fear. About loneliness. About rage. And I talked about walking anyway. When the segment ended, the host thanked me quietly. I think a lot of people needed to hear that, he said. He had no idea how right he was. The messages started coming that same afternoon. Emails. Letters. Comments forwarded by the station. Women in their 70s. Men in their 60s. Even younger people who said they were terrified of becoming invisible one day. You gave me permission, one message said. I thought it was too late. Another read. I sat at my kitchen table, tears dropping onto the wood, realizing something profound. My story didn't just save me. It reached others who were waiting, just like I had been, for proof that waiting wasn't the only option. Karen called that night. Her voice was different.
Softer.
I heard you, she said. Not about you.
You.
I didn't realize how much we were shrinking you, she admitted.
I'm sorry.
David came by the next weekend. He brought coffee and didn't rush to leave. He asked about my writing. He really listened when I spoke. They didn't suddenly stop worrying, but they stopped deciding. And that mattered more. Today, my life is not perfect. My knees still ache. Some mornings are harder than others. I still have moments where fear taps me on the shoulder and asks if I've gone too far. But now I answer it. I live alone. I write every day. I speak at community centers and libraries. I'm working on a full memoir, not because I need to prove anything, but because I finally believe my life is worth recording. People sometimes tell me I'm brave. I don't feel brave. I feel awake. And if there's one thing I want anyone watching this to understand, especially if you've been quietly written off, it's this. Being alive is not the same as being finished. If they say you're just waiting to die, start living again. Loudly. Imperfectly. On your own terms. Because the most shocking part of my story wasn't what happened to me. It was what happened after I refused to disappear. And I'm not done yet.